è il fiore, questo è il fiore del partigiano, questo è il fiore, questo è il fiore del partigiano, questo è il fiore, questo è il fiore del partigiano, questo è il fiore, questo è il fiore del partigiano. Una mattina mi sono alzato, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. Una mattina mi sono alzato e ho trovato l'invasor. Oh partigiano, portami via, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. Partigiano, portami via, che mi sento di morire.
Good evening. How are we all tonight? Before we begin this, I want to highlight that I haven't finished all of this quite yet. It came out last night, got removed, and uh, this interrupted my process a little bit until it showed up on archive. But what I have seen so far is troubling. Before we begin, there's going to be some misogyny. There's going to be some depictions of be some descriptions of emotional abuse. It is a difficult topic. That said, why are we doing this? Why am I doing this? You've heard me say it before that I don't like to talk about quote unquote drama unless I can make a lesson out of it. And as I was going through this, I was reminded of a poem that I was first told in college in Philosophy 101 by the professor. And the poem's pretty well known. It's kind of fun in a dark way. The poem is This Be the Verse by Philip Larkin. They fuck you up, your mom and dad. They may not mean to, but they do. They fill you with the faults they had and add some extra just for you. But they were fucked up in their turn by fools in old-style hats and coats, who half the time were soppy stern, the other half at each other's throat. Man hands misery on to man. It deepens like a coastal shelf. So get out while you can, and don't have any kids yourself. And I am reminded that it is so easy to come along and to pass on our pains and our traumas to others. But why are we doing this? Well, first of all, it's Rudyard, and if you've been on this channel for any length of time, you know we've covered him extensively because Rudyard's content is easy. It's always the same. He always makes the same mistakes. and and this in and of itself is a blessing for a streamer because it means I don't have to do the normal 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 hours of pre-work I do prior to talking about a topic, because it's just easy coverage. But by the same token, Whatifalthist has a ridiculous number of subscribers, people who presumably, at least some of them, think of him as an intelligent and insightful person and someone worth listening to. And this is a problem not because of the size, 700,000. This is a problem not because of the size of the channel nearly as much as it is because of the ideas he puts forth into the world. And it's always clear when you look at Whatifalthist content, and believe me, at this point, I've watched a lot of it. It's always clear what he wants to do is to validate his worldview. And he wants you to participate in that worldview. And this worldview is harmful. He has horrifyingly strange views about women. He has horrifyingly strange views about LGBTQ and other minorities. He has these incredibly dangerous ideas about the world, and he is insistent upon them in a kind of everyone clapped sort of manner that is deeply troubling to like people. If you have a basic knowledge of history or even of epistemology, you'll find Whatifalthist videos troubling. But this is a person who has some reach. Like this is someone whose voice gets out into the ether. And so where this began, and I saved these for everyone because Jesus Christ. I saved these for everyone as a bunch of tweets were brought to my attention last night. Or at least a version of a tweet. It must have been deleted. And then I went and I looked on Twitter and I found this. Buckle up. Hi, everyone. I have to tell you folks something. I am a quite advanced mystic and am capable of communicating with the spirit world, and already we're off to a great start. If you wonder why I know so much and am so successful at the age of 23, this is part of the reason. I have a photographic memory and have used this to have hundreds of hours of communication with different spiritual forces, whether God, the devil, Mother Nature, Hermes, Trimesticles, the Anima, and many more. I have a pretty good map of the spirit world. The Lord God and the Tree of Life, which is the spirit of consciousness connected to you by blood through evolution, are forcing me against my own consent to intervene in the game now. I really did not want to do this, but God forced my hand. I did this since I was concerned we'd all fucking die as a society if we don't. And I'm young enough, I'm invested. They're really worried about you. They can see inside your souls, and they know you're all miserable. None of you get laid, speak for yourself, son, have babies, or have any reason to live or connection to the divine. It causes them so much suffering, they've sent me to say everything is going to be fine, and that I'm here to be responsible for my people's survival and their soul. I'm here to explain how both the spirit and material worlds work to you in this stressful juncture in evolution. Thank God. You know, it's Christmas time, and Christmas is the traditional season where we celebrate the arrival of the Messiah, one to save us all. I had no idea it was going to be Rudyard. I serve God and the Tree of Life. I have 10 hours of video content. Actually, it's about 10 and a half. I've just released explaining what exactly happened to me, what I know of the world, and why modernity is all lies. Everything your era believes is. 99% of human history agrees about all this stuff, and modern industrial civilization is the one exception. This is an interesting sentence. We're going to come back to that in a second. Let me finish here. Get with the program. They all venerated the divine, and God doesn't take insults lightly. I suspect that God being linked with the Tree of Life would not be a traditionally Christian way to honor God, but here we are. Your bloodline, God, and the spirit world all believe you are completely insane. They see Western civilization as committing suicide, and the birth rate is in complete freefall, careening towards zero. They have already won, and you haven't realized yet. I'm not sure who they is. I presume God, which is somewhat contradictory, as God is apparently sending us Rudyard as a messenger. To save our souls and to bring us back to the light. But he has not himself won anything if we are not coming towards the light, and we have to have Rudyard come to save our souls. I'm quite confused. 99% of human history, let's come back to that, because that's a fascinating bit. 99% of human history agrees on absolutely nothing. You'll find that as you study history extensively. And history is kind of a dangerous thing. Social science is a dangerous thing, right? So like when you're a kid, your first experience with social science is broad topic where you cover things like ancient Egypt and you talk about pyramids and hieroglyphics. And if you're in my social studies class, you mummify a Cornish hen. You know, classical stuff. And then you move on and you cover other topics like Greece and Rome, and cover social, like all these dynamics. You'll get into a specific history. And the thing about history and social sciences in general is you kind of have to interact with the work product of everyone. Historians sometimes find themselves looking at what archaeologists do, what sociologists do, what psychologists do, and vice versa. All these groups, they largely have to rely on one another's work product in order to try to advance their own methodologies and agendas. And this is dangerous, right? It leads you to one of Rudyard's big flaws. He assumes that because he can read the end result of, for example, a book on anthropology, that he has somehow understood and divined how anthropology works. And this isn't really the case. And we'll see that as we get into this video tonight. Kind of how this starts to play out for him. This is a person who it was coming apart. This is a Pollyannic complex gone horribly wrong. And it only changed from there. There was a tweet today. This is, by the way, part of the same tweet. Twitter blue was a mistake. I have already established a unified theory of life that incorporates physics, history, every major world religion, biology, Darwinism, Plato, and Aristotle. And you see there, right, what I'm talking about, right? He makes an assumption here. This is a lot of stuff. To know all of biology and physics alone would be a lifetime of study. You also notice that he apparently doesn't think too highly of thousands of thinkers that have come in between Plato and Aristotle and Darwin. Watch the video if you're interested. Your ancestors were correct and you are wrong. I am a proud Christian, and I was very careful that nothing I say contradicts the Bible, so this message can elevate Christ. If I ever do, I will immediately submit to Scripture. Hold on to that thought, too. My message can be integrated with any given world religion, since I stand for freedom so that we can all experience the spirit world on our own terms. I've been there, and I'll show you how. I am a man who stands for other men. I stand so that men will not be treated as cattle. The meaning of life is empathy. I thought it was 42. To listen to others and understand them. At the same time, to take responsibility for your own actions, to be an adult and accurately assess your environment with self-awareness to see what you want yourself. To take your own destiny and follow the path God wants for you. The meaning of life is empathy. That's a bit simplistic, but it's not a bad empathy is not a bad thing to have. Take responsibility for your own actions, also a good thing to do. To be an adult and accurately assess your environment with self-awareness, which is a great thing to do. I hope Rudyard one day is able to do that. Let's continue. There is no irony or joke here. This is all my best attempt at truth. Look, I'm an empiricist where I just tell you what I read and what I hear from the divine. I don't know if divine scripture or divine inspiration is empiricism. I challenge anyone to disprove me, and believe me, people got right to work on that. I support civil debates to prove me wrong with those who would like to do so. If I'm wrong, I will immediately accept that. I have only 2 requests for you. The first is that you should not bother me or my people. And this is where I kind of had a thing, like, oh God, are there other people? Where are they? Where are they, Rudyard? Are they in the room right now? And if they are in the room right now, are they corporeal? Second, if they are corporeal and real people, did you guys buy property in Montana? Is this gonna be a thing? Are we gonna have Far Cry 5? Let the water wash away your sins? Please, dear God, let this not be a cult. Because, let's be frank, right-wingers becoming crazy cultists who found compounds and then things happen is a fine honored tradition in the United States, and we haven't had one in a while. Although arguably the wildlife refuge during the Mahler wildlife refuge during Obama was kind of close. Words of John C. Just say yes, yes. Every day, I or anyone I'm close to gets personally harassed. I refuse to speak to the divine. Well, that seems petty on the account of the fact that you have this mission to save mankind. This seems a little petty that you're like, well, if someone's not nice to me today, I think I shall abandon my divine mission for them. God and the tree are getting really tired of our society's immaturity and will punish this kind of behavior. Guys, I'm in for it now. I'm gonna be beaten up by a tree. I really don't want to bother anyone, and I ask the same of you. This is quite stressful for me, so I'd like a moment of calm to think. The second is that all debates and conversations I have must be based in logical first principles. No ideology, hysteria, or foolishness. Well, Rudyard, I will if you will. Oh, but wait! There's more! Tweet threads were also a mistake. You may wonder who I am to say this. I am Rudyard William Lynch. I am a 23-year-old ethnic Briton from rural Pennsylvania who lives in Texas now. I have hiked the Appalachia Trail, run a club for influencers in Los Angeles, and I run a YouTube channel with millions of independent viewers of a month named Whatifaltist, which talks about history, anthropology, geopolitics, and philosophy. Parentheses badly. I've lived in half a dozen states, countries, and worked that many different jobs. I've read nearly 1,000 books so far in my life and can draw any country in any year of history from memory on the spot. Don't worry, we're getting there. I also run an organization called the Order of the Crimson Dragon. Oh, Jesus Christ. We're a human capital group which aims at making men as excellent as possible. We are here to take your son and make him as brave, handsome, smart, charming, skilled, and wealthy as possible. I want to help your 19-year-old son and take responsibility from it for him. There's the cult. We found the cult. The OCD has 70 members with multiple in-person locations across the country. We have members in almost every field, including several celebrities, people from multiple presidential administrations, and genuine intellectuals. We are backed by powerful people in conservative politics, Silicon Valley, and the media. I will not share their names since I have class and decency, none of which has been displayed so far, by the way. We have established leadership and internal management structure that I built very carefully. We have teams working on throwing a conference this spring in Austin, a media company clubhouse, humanities research center, spiritual research center, humanities research center, and spiritual research. We are being sharp young men together, and our goal is to rebuild social institutions around the principles of honor, freedom, and truth. For those interested, we are opening to the public in 2 months. That's it. It's an honor to serve. I'm here to help as much as I can. Best, Rudyard Lynch. Thanks, Emmanuel. I have the video archives. They're up. We're going to watch some of it. But wait, there's more. These are the videos in question that Whatifalthist later removed. These videos explain all of this for those who are interested. The third video, which ties up all the loose ends, will be coming out in an hour or two. Except for one video which I already made, I will be radio silent for the next 2 weeks to give you folks some time to emotionally process all of this. And then there was Finally, you should be skeptical of me at first, since that's just healthy. Boundaries. But I'm happy to go on various shows and stuff to show you folks I'm legitimate and have your best interests in mind. Let me know who's interested. I am the intellectual equivalent of an assault rifle, which means you're relatively simplistic, easy to use, and far more deadly than you have any right to be to other people. I'd buy that. That might be the truest fucking statement you've made all this time. Right there. So feel free to push back on my ideas as much as possible, but please be polite and rational about it. Well, Rudyard, I can't promise that I'm going to be polite, but I will be rational. And not but a few hours after all this was posted, we already had the first retraction. The latest videos I have released have attracted lots of negative attention. I understand that. This was a gesture I made, given I wanted to make a story as ridiculous as possible. Ridiculous as possible as a mirror to demonstrate how silly our society is. We believe stuff as ridiculous as the thing I said in this video. Our society is incapable of self-regulating our own emotional state. By society, do you mean you? We are incapable of reaching God. We cannot have children. We're completely depressed. I reoriented our spiritual worldview to what 99% of history believed. No, you didn't. The things our society believes are completely ridiculous and suicidal. I gave you a mirror to your universe with something equally ridiculous. This sentence bothers me, and it won't be the first sentence that bothers me tonight. But a mirror is going to show you yourself. You need not have something that's equally ridiculous be a mirror, because the mirror just reflects back at you what you are. Reality is a joke. None of you actually know how the universe works. Fair, but then again, neither do you. The loss of certainty will feel like an opiate withdrawal. It will be excruciatingly painful, and I'm sorry. That being said, I would like us to have debates when the air clears about if anything I said is wrong, which is already contradictory. And that'll be a theme tonight, by the way. Contradictions happening one after another in such a messed up way that you can only wonder if he has lost his goddamn mind, which, to be fair, seems to be the case. I said something deeply ridiculous to move the baseline away from something else deeply ridiculous. That's not how that works. My former policy stands. Can you argue me out of anything I said? Can we please have rational debates about if the things I said are actually wrong, stemming from first principles? It should be fun. I challenge you. I've challenged Rudyard in the past. You didn't accept. If I'm a madman, I should be pretty easy to beat. I'll immediately fold if the things I say can't hold up to traditional logical standards. Oh dear. I think it didn't end. I will not be responding to the press for another 2 weeks just to let emotions clear. I didn't know there was a press for crazy people, but then again, we just elected Trump, so I suppose there is. I am completely psychologically fine. Okay, let's hammer on this a little bit. I am completely psychologically fine. Let's drill down here. Get into the nitty-gritty. There's a movie that I liked in high school. I haven't watched it in quite some time, but it's called The Exorcism of Emily Rose. And if you're not familiar, it is a horror and crime thriller. A horror and crime thriller, which is it's a good movie for the most part. It's based off of a true story, at the very least, the exorcisms being performed part. And about a young woman who is believed she was possessed by a demon. The church exorcised her to the extent that multiple times, to the extent that her health declined and she died. They were tried for negligence, and this is a adaptation of that. And at one point, a psychologist comes up to the defense lawyer, and he goes, awareness of a cycle is counterintuitive of that state. In other words, crazy people don't know they're crazy. If there's anything I can do to show that, I will. That being said, our society is very sick, and so I show you a worldview that 99% of history would view as reasonable. And this is insane. This line that keeps coming up. I will show you what 99% of people believed. Whatifalthist has, like I said, always desperately wanted people to believe what he believes, to be validated by thinking that what he believes has been a unbroken chain that the best have believed since time immemorial. This is immaturity at its finest. And like it's not uncommon. It's not an uncommon problem, particularly if you're looking at older history. Like a lot of older historians kind of went round the bend a little bit about the fall of civilization, such as it were. And this is, I think, a interesting concept to kind of look at, because it elevates ourselves above what we are, because we are human beings and we are one part of a tapestry of stories. And this I need to place yourself in the center. This need is not normal, but it is something that I would expect from what comes next. At any rate, by this morning, the videos were taken down, the tweets were deleted, and a new tweet went up where Rudyard claimed that he was making up something as ridiculous as possible in order to make an advertisement for his channel. And here we sit with this thing. Do I believe Rudyard made all these tweets up and made 10.5 hours of video because he was making a viral marketing campaign? Do you do that? No, you don't. That is not what normal people do. So we have these videos, and they are, like I said, 10 hours, and I haven't reviewed all of it yet because holy shit. But what we're going to do right now is we're going to take a short break, a couple minutes. We're going to grab some water, stretch your legs, and then we're going to come and we're going to start watching this, and we're going to have fun in the dark humor way. To borrow something from Mandatory Fun Day, this is dark humor in the live, laugh, toilet bath vein of dark humor. And we're going to talk about why we don't pass our traumas on to each other and why that's bad. So, take 5, everybody. All right. What is this music from? It kind of reminds me of Diablo. That is one of the battle pieces from Homeworld 2. This is Rudyard presenting a bit of a autobiography. It is the disturbing part we talked about, and it does have some darkly funny parts. Buckle up.
Everybody, I'm Rudyard the Whatifalthist guy, and before you watch this video, I have to add a couple different preambles for all of our collective sanity. You'll see why. And I'm going to keep saying that in this intro section. Things will make sense at the end that did not make sense at the start. And to go through this stuff, firstly, there's lots of stuff in this video where, as I wrote it, I didn't know how, because human words cannot convey it. And the way I feel giving you this video is I'm trying to explain something that cannot be explained in words, which is intensely difficult. And so when I try to tell you something, I wish I could show it to you.
There's a word for things that cannot be described by words. It's ineffable.
But I have to write words. And the narration style for this will jump from first to third person. That's annoying for you to listen to and annoying for me to write, but it'll also make sense at the end. This story will also emphasize lots of detail.
I want to point out that I haven't actually gotten to the end, but so far I don't necessarily think it does.
Which seem really unimportant, but will also make sense at the end. And certain parts of the story will make me, in the way it's narrated, look like a complete narcissistic egomaniac.
Actually, all of the story will, but that's beside the point.
I apologize for that. But again, it will make sense at the end. And parts may come across as wildly masturbatory. You'll see with that word. But again, as I said, it will make sense at the end. The story will also get unbelievably brutal. I would tell you to not watch this video if you can't handle that sort of thing. But to be frank, your grandpa fought in World War II. He was fine. He saw worse stuff.
All right, I want to point out that I am 36. My grandfather fought in World War II. Well, one of them did. The other one joined the Air Force, which was formed after World War. However, that's not really the same thing here. This is much worse than a machine gun nest.
And I'm choose not to put the 18 plus rating here because I had to live with this crap as a kid. And if I lived through it, you can watch it. Also, for your ancestors, their kids saw their parents fuck, they saw them kill animals, they saw war, they saw famine. If your ancestors' kids can see bad stuff, you can. They're not going to die. So I understand why YouTube would put a 18 plus rating on it, and I respect your decision. It's your company. You have responsibility for it. I don't. But I'm just going to throw the appeal out. This video's length is also pretty insane. Coming from a media background, I didn't want to do it, but it's the role of the police, the city government, and they had stuff like Tammany Hall, which controlled the politics of the North.
Long story short, Rudyard decided to do 10.5 hours of trauma dumping. By the way, your ancestors were not fine when they fought in World War II. They came home, were violently alcoholic, ended up being kind of shitty. And had there been no fault divorce in the 50s, none of you would be alive.
Northeast. My father's line has a strange curse that each male must pick an impossible battle. My father told me growing up that the only thing that matters in life...
Okay, first of all, picking an impossible battle is not a curse. It's a character defect. Normal people learn to let things go. They don't sit there and keep fighting things that they can't affect.
Life is honor. And if I lived with honor, then it didn't matter what money I made or the rest of
Look, I'm going to make this joke once and get it out of my system. Honor? I barely know her.
my life. At least I was a man who had honor. And he said growing up that your status as a man is determined by do you hold your word and do you die on the hills you need to die on. And to be a lynch, by definition, is to put your own honor above your life, which is the highest virtue.
Very recently, a friend of mine sent me a particular outlook on life. Like, you as you get older, you learn that your job is not to die on hills. Are you really going to die on that hill? Someone is. We'll talk a little bit about this as he goes through it, though.
A human can do. Honor culture is an integral part of Celtic society going back thousands of years, which Thomas Sowell has written a tremendous amount about, and which manifests in Appalachia with the Scots-Irish as the most obvious example. My great-grandpa was in the Jersey City police force, and he picked the wrong faction in the local Democrat Party politics. He was the last man to stand by his patron when everyone else had fled him. He killed his entire reputation and career in the city due to his loyalty to his patron. My grandpa, Joseph Lynch, grew up in Jersey City and worked as a longshoreman.
So, honor culture. Earlier today, I was watching President Sunday cover some of this, and someone made a crack in chat about Worf from Star Trek The Next Generation and Deep Space Nine. And obviously the associated shows that have come afterwards. And Worf, if you're not familiar, is a Klingon. If you're not familiar with Star Trek, Klingons are a quote-unquote warrior race who are set up in the original series as antagonists to our heroes, and they later become allies, and they have a kind of complex... they are a society with which we look a lot at when we watch Star Trek. And there is a interesting set of parallels here that I noticed, I did not think about last night. This is why you should at least wait 3 days before you talk about things. Klingon society is set up such that they are a very honor and glory-bound culture. This is the things they espouse and enjoy and glorify. And they also are set up such that the sins of the father pass down to the sons. Worf, in particular, is a great example of this as a character because he is a Klingon who is traditionally a Federation enemy who serves in Starfleet on a Federation ship. And the reason he does this is because as a child, he was at an outpost that was massacred by another Federation enemy, the Romulans. And Starfleet comes and they find Worf and they take him back to Earth and they give him to Russian parents of all things. And he's a Klingon. It's such that he is in two worlds. He is both raised by humans and he has this Klingon ancestry, and therefore he comes about his Klingonness very strangely. He idolizes being Klingon. He extols it. He believes it's the most important thing to act honorably. He's the character who consistently goes on about honor and courage. So much to the point that Charles Sonnenberg, SF Debris, for those from older YouTube, made the joke about Worf that he named his balls honor and courage. The Borg may be formidable, but they don't have honor and courage yet. This is a kind of like a particularly interesting character arc for Worf, because Worf has a benefit of both being a character on The Next Generation for 7 years, and things happen to him there. He finds out about his father's relationship with another Klingon council member, and this other council member is the one who betrayed the Klingon Empire that allowed his family to be killed in that massacre. And in order to protect the political situation, the Klingons lie about it and say that Worf's father is the one who betrayed the Empire. And that shame passes on to Worf and Worf's half-brother, who's another character who shows up. Worf has a son, and he happens to be a fucking terrible father. This comes full circle in Deep Space Nine when Worf is reintroduced, that his son joins the Klingon Defense Force during a time of war, just to try to show his father up. And there's a second character in Deep Space Nine, Jadzia Dax. And Jadzia Dax is a Trill, and the caveat of the Trills is they are a joined species between a symbiote and the host. And the symbiote carries the memories of the host and the symbiote forward throughout the multiple. So Jadzia marries Worf and dies, and a new host takes over. His name is Ezri. And they're sitting in one of the later episodes of Deep Space Nine. And Worf talks about, and talking about the Klingons, and Worf brings up how Klingons are bound by tradition and honor. And Ezri, familiar with Worf because of her time with Jadzia, and even more so familiar with Klingon culture because a previous host had been an ambassador to the Klingons, brings up that all of that is a lie. It's a myth. And Worf has to reckon with that and decide what to do with that in a moment of difficulty. Rudyard never does this. Rudyard takes everything about that he's being told about honor and he keeps running with it. It's going to be a reoccurring theme. He's going to say it so much that I think he has named his balls honor. So the other point I kind of want to make about this is honor culture is one of the fucking stupidest things you can ever be engaged in. Because honor culture is a methodology of control of you, of the person you are, and how you value your relationship to society. It means that despite what he said in all those rambling tweets about coming to the divine on your own terms, you never can, because there's this little handle on your arm called "Are you behaving honorably?" which tells you how you have to think and relate to the world. It is a way of abdicating responsibility for what you believe is right and fitting into society. This is a dangerous thing to tell people to believe in. It leads you down a difficult path where you are no longer accountable for your actions because other people are helping you define them. Oh yeah, this gets real bizarre.
He was 18 years old in 1942 when he was drafted to fight. He passed an IQ test with no background in mathematics and was sent as an aide to the British, he said, because they wanted to make Americans look better to the British.
IQ tests are not pass-fail.
By having a humanities-based guy who could talk about philosophy and stuff. And my grandpa always underplayed stuff. He might have been doing more stuff. I don't know. And for those that don't know, the Enigma code was how the British hacked into the German code system in World War II. Some historians think that that turned the tide of the war.
Enigma was a system of ciphers used by the Germans in order to communicate. It was supposed to be uncrackable. The British cracked it.
And my grandpa was part of that program. We don't really know what he was doing, though. And he didn't talk.
He was getting Alan Turing coffee.
About it for 30 years until after the event was over, when he was just watching the TV, and the Enigma team came up, and he said to my family, "Oh yeah, I worked there." After the war,
Bletchley Park is the area, or is the location in the United Kingdom where this was worked on. The cracking of the Enigma code actually took quite a bit of time, and it required a lot of sacrifices from a lot of people. It's not beyond the pale that his grandfather participated in such a way, but like, for example, those of you who are aware about the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago has a a exhibit, the U505, and this is a Type 7B, I think. Top of my head, let me check. Oh no, yeah, it's a Type 6C. This was a U-boat that was captured, and the Enigma encoder was captured on it, and it was used to help decode this more of the cipher. And throughout the war, they could read various portions of the cipher, and they could use that to extrapolate information. Code breaking is a fascinating topic, which you should research on your own sometime.
Or he went back to America and he was able to go to Harvard on the GI Bill. And he tried to be a lawyer after that, but then they forced him to take too many cases that were against his honor. And so he quit to become a professor. However, during his career as a lawyer, he befriended a Russian noblewoman who became quite fond of him. And so when she died, she left him her inheritance. And when he was a professor, he studied constitutional law, teaching at a school in northern New Jersey up by New York. And the book he wrote in constitutional law was that the founding fathers had purposely structured the Constitution so that there was a degree of plausible deniability inside the philosophic logic so that you could have a sub-variety of different possible positions with each law that was written.
So, to wit, this was confirmed earlier, they found, Sunday's chat, found Rudyard's grandfather and his book, and it is a book on originalism, which is not quite what Rudyard is describing here. I have a strong suspicion that he hasn't actually read the book, because at any rate, Rudyard is, this is the other reason I don't think that his later retraction is entirely true, because we can match this up disturbingly well to a lot of his particular works. This story about his grandfather writing the book appears to absolutely be true. Like, this detail can be verified. I'm not sure all of these details can be verified, but this one has been.
Married my grandmother, Irene O'Neill, where they met at the St. Patrick's Day dance. And she worked as she was a homemaker for the family, and he had 5 children where he moved to Princeton, New Jersey to support his family. He did a
just a note, Freudian slip there. She worked. She was a homemaker. Homemaking is work. Homemaking is hard work.
lot to try to assimilate out of the Irish community. So he studied classical literature and he studied culture and the Renaissance. And he was really into medieval theology. And he became very Catholic due to the war, where he believed that the war was symbolic for the dangers of modernism and totalitarianism.
As opposed to the other Irish who weren't Catholic at all.
And the only way we could break out of that was through a return to Christianity. So he was a very strong fundamentalist Catholic. And he thought the 1930s Catholic Church, which meant most people saw as ridiculous reactionary, he thought that it was too liberal and they had to return to medieval values. He was also, although he didn't teach at Princeton, he lived in Princeton, and so he was friends with a lot of the professors, and he was friends with multiple of the most important Catholic philosophers of that time period. And he supported my family off a middle-class income. They lived in a small house together, and they had, I don't know if I said he had 5 kids before, but that's crazy. The Irish used to have that many kids. And, oh yeah, so Irene O'Neill, she's a descendant of Niall of the 9 Hostages, who was a Irish warlord in the 2nd century AD, and he he has 6 million descendants because he slept with that many women, and that was a common occurrence for Irish chieftains. It's why, like, all of these last names have millions of descendants, where that's true for multiple Irish leaders. Alastair of the Isles in Scotland's an easy example. Niall of the Nine Hostages. I'm
just saying, this guy must have gone absolutely ballistic at the Second Vatican Council. Like, holy shit. When the Mass started to be said in English, whoa, he probably lost his shit.
sure Cuchulainn is from O'Connor is from the Irish Hercules, Cuchulainn. Irish last names are nearly 2,000 years old, which is pretty cool. And my family were fishermen in the 1800s before we moved over. And so I wonder if Irish last names are that old, because Gaelic, O'Loinch, in Gaelic, the last name Lynch is from O'Loinchug, which is son of a fisherman. So were my ancestors fishermen for 2,000 years? Final hilarious story about my grandpa. So my grandpa died about 10 years ago, and he was like 95. It's crazy. He was born 1926. And for the final year he was at the home, or the retirement home, whenever he saw an actress on the TV, he yelled whore, because he said, quote, all of these actresses have sold their bodies to get their status. And he said, I won't stand for this. So this leads, final thing.
So this is incredibly telling, and you're going to find this theme running throughout Rudyard's discussion here. The men in his life, his grandfather, his father, are incredibly misogynistic. And if you watched Rudyard's content, or you've been around for us watching Rudyard's content, so is Rudyard. This is incredibly telling. It's another reason why I don't think this is fake. I think this is a genuine thing from him, like a genuine expression of what has happened to him, and or at the very least how he perceives what has happened to him. And it resonates through his content. It resonates through how he views women as objects that are to be used and venerated only as mothers and sex symbols to be, instead of people. It matches so very well.
Grandpa fought against the university system. He picked two impossible battles, which is classic Lynch move. I can't say Lynch move, but he picked the fight with modernity because he thought it was all satanic, and he also picked a fight with the university because when he was a professor, he was the only conservative for over a decade, and it's crazy to see he went from voting for FDR to voting.
This is incredibly unlikely. There are a lot of really conservative professors, even today. And you'll hear other people say this. Like even today, there are a lot of conservative professors
for Trump, and my mom, and my mom's not an objective source, said that when he retired, the leftist faculty threw a party because they got rid of the last conservative.
They probably threw a party because an asshole had just left.
Next comes Peter Lynch, unrelated to the famous investor Peter Lynch, who is my uncle, who worked as a strategist for the New Jersey police for nearly 40 years. He said in the 1980s that the greatest new threats to New Jersey were Latin American, especially Salvadorian, and black gangs. This killed his career for the rest of over 30 years because he said the politically incorrect answer, and New Jersey's pretty corrupt, where they only targeted the Italian mafia, and you weren't allowed to say something besides that. And so he became incredibly nihilistic and dissatisfied. He always talks about the Masons running everything. Very sharp guy, though. He's really into Korean dragon boat racing in Morocco and Korea and foreign cultures. Next comes my dad, Mark Lynch, who was born in 1961, and he went to Harvard like my grandpa as a young man. He ran the Harvard Strategy Club as his hobby. After that, he started working in Wall Street when the Reagan presidency started, where he met my mom. My dad made solid money as a mutual fund manager and banking expert. He's an expert in regional and international banking. My father has the same obsessive nerd spirit as what I have.
So he's a business guy. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Know what they say about business majors.
Where he's read over 300 books on banking history. He may be the person in the world who's read the most banking history. I try to get him to write a history of banking, and he doesn't do it. And he runs a Mad Max fan account and banking advice page called Corpus Colossus on Twitter. Some of my friends followed my dad without even them realizing it. And he has the ability to look at the outside of a bank, like its driveway or its building structure, and then assess the strategic model the bank uses from that and its core strengths and weaknesses versus other banks. You can give him any city in America.
That's just voodoo. I could do that too. I just make shit up.
And he will know the top 20 banks in each of their history. I had a joke with my friends growing up where we'd walk past a certain 100-year-old bank, and I'd text my dad, and he'd tell me their entire history. And he studied the banking system of every major country just as his hobby. He also has a hobby in studying Marxist literature, where he's read over 200 books on the topic since his college thesis was on the Left Book Club, which was...
I don't think Marxists read 200 books on Marxism. Most Marxists don't read any books on Marxism, to be perfectly frank. I don't know how many books I've read in my life. I've had to read quite a few. I've never bothered to count. And the reason I don't is because that's bullshit. And you know it's bullshit. Come on. Everyone knows that's bullshit.
Was a leftist printing company for political content in 1930s Britain. And he's read 200 books on the topic. And so growing up, he would explain Marxist lies books on the topic for political content. Was a leftist books on the topic since his, and he'd tell me their entire history. And he studied the banking system of every major country just as his hobby. He also has a hobby in studying Marxist literature, where he's read over 200 books on the topic since his college thesis was on the Left Book Club, which was a leftist printing company for political content in 1930s Britain. And he's read 200 books on the topic. And so growing up, he would explain Marxist lies to me, and that he would read these books to me. And then he would go through how the Marxists had lied, the methods they have used for deception, like overemphasizing numbers, not looking at practical application or human nature. So I heard that stuff growing up.
He read 200 books to you and explain Marxist lies to you, and yet you can't bring up anything specific, but only generalizations. It kind of feels like Rudyard's dad just sort of started like, fucking communists, fucking communist liars, always running around overemphasizing their fucking numbers, not really keeping into account human nature. It's human nature to want all the money and all the honor, all the honor. Fucking communist. Now to resume your regularly scheduled programming.
And he said he studied leftist philosophy because he wanted...
I know a list of 20 communists in banking.
to know how someone could have completely incorrect beliefs and yet be so sure of themselves. And my dad's also predicted every major financial crisis of the last 40 years. And he would tell me as a child, you know, Rudyard, due to money printing, this country's not going to be in a good place around when you're college aged will have blown out our entire economic system. I hope it.
Rudyard was college age. He's 24, 23 now. Rudyard was college aged at 18, 5 years ago. 5 years ago, we were 2019. We were not experiencing inflation. We did experience inflation in 2020, but this was largely due to a supply hangup caused by global disruptions from COVID, which was not caused by the printing of money so much as it was caused by viruses. Checkmate, Rudyard's dad. I win.
It's better once you're out of college, though. And my family were in the nice house and nice vacation cast of rich, not in the private helicopter and complex trust fund category of rich. I think my family's net worth when I was a kid was like $10 to $15 million total.
Okay, let's talk about this for a moment. $10 to $15 million is the category of complex trust fund, by the way. Hands down. I grew up in a nice house type situation, particularly after my dad remarried, after my mother passed away. It was a 6-bedroom house, or a 5-bedroom house, multiple bathrooms, 3-car garage. We didn't have $15 million, that's for damn sure. I got to go on cool trips, like my sister went to space camp, I went to Challenge, stuff like that. We did cool stuff. It's not unlikely that he has no real perspective here, because if you had $15 million, you could probably afford the limo to the airport, to put it mildly. And yeah, you would be in the trust fund situation. In fact, if Rudyard is going to say something here about his dad saying you're not going to inherit anything till I'm dead. If his father has that kind of money, which seems incredibly unlikely from what we hear from the rest of the story, and he has not put it into a trust, I would be flabbergasted because someone is giving him really bad advice. But again, I don't entirely think this is terribly likely on the grounds of what he kind of says otherwise. Like a lot of this is inconsistent.
And my dad, I'm sorry, I love you, Dad, but you have very strong Asperger's, which you might have picked up on. And my dad studies 19th century train routes as a hobby. He memorizes them, and he has an incredibly encyclopedic knowledge of human history, amongst many other things. And when I was a kid, I would just barrage my dad with infinite questions. I'd ask my dad 1,000 questions a day. I would ask him questions on how... I'd ask him questions on how he made decisions. I'd ask him questions of the world. It was nice having my dad around because I could just feed off his information. I downloaded so much of it, and it's so.
I can totally picture him following his dad around, asking questions. Why is the sky blue? And communists tried to turn the sky red. Totally. And there's a kind of very disturbing admiration here that going forward.
So much of my worldview. And my dad told me growing up that the only thing that matters in life is honor. And he said, I don't care if you're poor. I don't care what you do with your life as long as you have honor. And that was a value we kept hammering home.
This does not, by the way, traditionally things that rich parents tell their kids.
All the time, that the only thing you could truly own as a man is your own honor. And an example of the kind of guy my dad is that I once texted him, I am going to Mexico tomorrow for a week. And his reply was cool in lowercase. When I was 16, my dad...
So your dad doesn't give a shit about you? Like, yeah, if I told my dad, hey, I'm going to Mexico for a week, he'd be like, well, do you have a plan? Where are you staying? Have you checked the crime stats? Blah, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I lived in Chicago for 10 years. You know what my dad did, and me and him have our problems. My dad would check the fucking police blotter for Chicago every week. And still call every week.
Dad said, "You are a man now. I had 2 roles as a father, to teach you to be a man and to teach you have honor. I have succeeded at both. You are now a man. You are now responsible for your own actions. Figure your own stuff out." And he once said, when he bought me my first car, and he said, "I will buy you the cheapest car you can fit into," which was a Subaru. And he said, "Now, the things you do out there are your responsibility, not mine." And
2,000 points if I hit a communist.
And
I'm sorry. Rudyard's dad is going to be intervening at random moments, guys. It's just going to happen.
yeah, another example of the kind of guy my dad is that he ate tuna fish every single day of his life from ages 12 to ages 30. And he did it because it was 50 cents cheaper than the other sandwich option. And he was just accruing the financial benefits of 50 cents a day. And then it gave him crippling mercury poisoning. And my father had crippling mercury poisoning when he inseminated me, which nearly killed him. And nothing worked, and he worked with Russian alternatives.
Okay, I'm stopping right there. Let's all relax for a minute. Oh yeah, happy Hanukkah, everybody. I was just reminded I kept Shabbat today because I'm not Jewish. Anyway. First of all, Rudyard, your father did not inseminate you. He would have inseminated your mother. Second of all, this is a really interesting choice of word, right? Insemination is clinical in a certain sense. Like you inseminate a cow to make a calf. You have sex with and impregnate or conceive a child. Inseminate is just this really strange choice of words, like way too overly clinical. And that's notwithstanding the part where he just messed up the order. I just have willies now. Fucking communists made me inseminate my son. Why would I stop? Because we have to keep going. Mercury poisoning symptoms, real quick. Help is available. I don't have mercury poisoning, but thank you, girl. Health exposure. Yeah. Loss of peripheral vision, pins and needles, lack of coordinated, impairment of speech, hearing, walking, or tremors, emotional changes such as mood swings, fucking communists, irritability, nervousness, excessive shyness. Here, let's put this up. Insomnia, neuromuscular changes, headaches, disturbances in sensations, changes in nerve responses, and or poor performance on tests of mental function. I'm beginning to know what happened. Starting to see a picture of why Rudyard is the way he is.
Healers who lowered his mercury blood pressure. And then he went on a trip to China for business, and then the jacked up.
Look, I am a kidney disease patient, and I am 99% sure that while mercury is involved in the taking of blood pressure, it's in the vial, not in you. You do not lower your mercury blood pressure. Mercury poisoning is, to my understanding, incurable. Look, there are like a number of whack jobs in the world who will say like, "Oh yeah, you have heavy metal poisoning. Eat this diet to get rid of it." First of all, the things that process that in your body will process out what it can. There is no diet you can eat that's going to do that. And also, like, they recommend like fucking eating clay. Don't do that. There is nothing you can do. Like first of all, if you don't get heavy metals like those patches you put in your feet, fuck that shit. You don't get heavy metal poisoning like that, and you don't get rid of it like that. It's just there. You're fucked.
The mercury again, and then he had another. He suffered for like over a decade with very painful mercury poisoning. He also had gout, which was very unpleasant. I remember his suffering. He couldn't eat beef or wine for years. He was just on like a purely vegetarian diet, which is sad. And yeah, the mercury poisoning was crippling pain. And I can't overstate how instrumental my dad is to who I am as a person. My dad's very wise and said a lot of things that stuck with me for my entire life. For example, let your thought and action be one. The second you think, act.
That is, by the way, some of the most fucking terrible advice you can ever give a person. Oh, Jesus Christ. Obviously that's bad, particularly if you're a person who has intrusive thoughts. You understand exactly why you don't do that.
When I was scared about failing a test in high school, my dad took me to the local creek outside our house, and he said, "Look at this creek flow, Rudyard. This creek was here long before the white man came, and it was probably here before the natives were there before, or before the earlier group of natives had replaced another group of natives." And he said, "This creek will keep..."
Isn't that a scene from Pocahontas? You can't step in the same river twice. Da 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 da. Da 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 da. I don't remember the words. Also, that's not necessarily guaranteed about the creek thing.
Flowing whether or not you fail the test. You should know that so many of your worries are in your head, and you go out into nature and they're not there anymore. He told me that the way to get rich was to acquire useful skills, and then once you have enough useful skills, someone will pay you for a skill. And he said that there are certain hills you have to die on to be a man, and he said that when everything's said and done, the only thing that...
The problem with this metaphor is that if you're dying on a hill, you're done. You have picked a spot upon which you are planting a fight, and you have given up. You are going to stay there. You don't leave from the hill you die on. It is the hill that you just die on. You're done. You're dead. It's over. It's the end. Finite. Finished.
matters is that you stood where you needed to stand. And he read to me and my sister before bed every single night.
It's like the Captain America thing. Plant yourself like a tree and do not move. And then Tony Stark moves you.
For a decade. He read us all of Lord of the Rings, all of Narnia, some of Louis L'Amour, the autobiography of Lee Kuan Yew, Niall's Saga, and Dune, among like a dozen other books.
Suddenly, the fact that he's citing Dune really puts the messianic complex into perspective.
Got me 20 of the great courses or college-level courses.
None of the great courses are college-level. Jesus Christ. Look, I've taken God knows how many college-level courses, and I'm not convinced that the college-level courses I took were college-level courses.
And played them in the car when I was a child so I could get an education with him. Then we would talk about those topics together. And my dad had a rule that I could only play strategy games until I was age 15. He said that he wanted to innately wire my neurology in a way so that I could think strategically on a basal level. He told me that this would do me more good in life than school would. Although my
I can't. Look, I enjoy strategy games myself, but I don't. When I went to college and joined Army ROTC and I started learning tactics, the degree to which I learned about how much does not match up and how thinking effectively and logically and tactically and strategically have a lot to do with being fucking sane, first of all, and second of all, have very little to do with how they might necessarily be depicted in games, are a big thing. And don't get me wrong, I find strategy games fun. I play Total War to this day. I play Warcraft. I just bought the Warcraft remastered stuff and I'm having a good time with that. I enjoy those things. They are not they are systemic. They aren't the same thing. This is not the kind of thing you run around not the kind of thing you run around with and think you're getting an education.
My family was wealthy. My dad didn't spend money on me. He forced me to work for stuff. When I was 16, I was already driving my own car, making my own money, running errands, and washing my clothes. He would leave me at home for weeks when he was on business trips for work and expected me to take care of the house, do affairs in his name when I was a teenager. At the company my dad worked at, he was one
That's commonly called fraud.
of the last people who ran a department that wasn't woke. The company was being stultified by bureaucracy, and when he retired, the company fell into a DEI bureaucracy that killed it. When my dad left, they said, we need...
The banking industry is very, very well known for its wokeness, by the way. All those white guys running around snorting lines of cocaine, totally woke, totally into DEI. That's definitely a thing that happened, and when he retired, everyone clapped. I'll plot twist: the bank was Lehman Brothers. That's what killed Lehman Brothers. Woke.
To which his reply is, if I did it, you can do it. And as a child, my father would repeatedly tell me, you will not inherit a cent until I die, because he said, you have my blood in your veins.
First of all, yes, that's typically how inheritance works. You don't inherit things until the person dies. Very rare that you inherit things before they die. You have your blood in it. Was there a transfusion? I asked because quite literally he inseminated you earlier.
And so you can figure out a way to make some money. And he said, you throw someone in the pool, they're not going to drown. They're going to swim.
No, that's not correct. Okay. Don't throw people who cannot swim into the pool. Side tangent. My father and my mother, before she passed away, were part of a scuba diving club. So very often, as children, we were in around large bodies of water, oftentimes unsupervised while people were scuba diving. So every day, every week for years, my dad would take us to, and this continued well past the time that he was part of the scuba diving club. He would take me and my sister for swimming lessons. We went across the border of Illinois into Indiana, into Hammond, Indiana, to what I swear to God has to be the last YWCA in existence. And at this place, there was a pool, and for years we did swimming lessons. And swimming kind of became a second nature thing to me. To the degree that I kind of thought that everyone in the world could swim. Not exactly. I knew people couldn't swim, but I figured that you either are competent at swimming or you're not. So in college, in part of Army ROTC is something called the CWST, the Combat Water Survival Test. And the Combat Water Survival Test actually is a matter of significant emotional trauma for many people, because as it turns out, they're not great swimmers. And like this has a number of events. Probably the most traumatic is you get up on the high dive and put a wool cap over your eyes, and they walk you out, and they hand you a plastic rifle called a rubber ducky, and you walk off the end of the thing, and you hit the water, and the wool cap comes off, and you can see again, and you got to come back up holding the rifle. Pretty simple stuff. Unless you are scared of heights and water. Terrifying. This is just this one of the ways in which you are tortured into a better version of yourself, courtesy of the U.S. government.
And I once asked him for new shoes as a teenager, and he just stood there and said, no. And my old pair, I'd worn them for like a year. They were pretty beat up.
So he's an asshole is what you're saying. Like, I know parents who don't have much, but they work to make sure their kids are comfortable. And I know parents who go without so that their kids can be okay. And your dad's just like, fuck you, kid.
And he said that he did all this effort because I was representative of my entire bloodline, and that my actions represented the honor of my people, my self, and my ancestors.
So the kid can't have shoes? Your ancestors frown upon you because of the communists. The communists are made why you can't have shoes. You have to honor your ancestors. You have to make them proud. Get your own shoes. Defeat the commies. Defeat the commie shoe salesman.
And thus I had to reflect that responsibility in my actions. And that was a theme all of my family had. Both of my parents were into the ancestor stuff and the honor stuff. My father's become kind of a hermit, where he lives in the woods in Pennsylvania and avoids society because he thinks the public is stupid. And he, yeah, that's kind of his lifestyle. Like, I didn't really have any connections growing up because my dad lives as a hermit. And he has a girlfriend, though. And he's a prepper. He has over a month of food and water at any given time in case stuff goes bad.
I am 100% willing to believe that he is a prepper. I am 100% willing to believe that he, in his stupidity, thinks other people are stupid. I do not believe he has a girlfriend. I believe there is a woman chained to a radiator in one of those fucking bunker complexes that you see on YouTube shorts. We should probably send someone.
I once asked my father, because he's Catholic, how does it feel to be a papist? And he replied, let me consult with the Pope before I answer. And when my dad has gone to Republican Party events, he wears a tie with rhinos on it to show that he is spiritually a rhino. Now we get to my mom's side of the family. My mom was born in Kitchener-Waterloo, Ontario.
The misogyny ramps the fuck up here.
To parents from Nebraska. This made her a Canadian citizen, which is an important plot point later. Her ancestry is mostly English, stemming from the third Albion seed migration the Quakers did from northwestern England to Pennsylvania and the Middle States. In a prime example of anthropology in action, I grew up in Chester County, while according to 23...
Well, Toilet, given everything we've seen so far, the evidence that Rudyard's father is a very bad prepper is probably overwhelming. Like dude's probably got enough bullets, though, for Armageddon twice.
3andMe, my ancestors are from Chester, England. Her ancestry has been in America since the 1600s, where I have ancestors on the Mayflower, as well as ancestors stretching from upstate New York down to North Carolina, kind of concentrated in the middle states. And my ancestry is 90% British Isles, with something like 80% being just English and Irish. The final 20% is a mix.
Third Albion seed would make a great name for a bluegrass band.
Of basically different Protestant ethnicities between Scots-Irish, Scottish, Welsh, Dutch, German, Swedish, Finnish, etc. And I'm 10% German ancestry.
Dad's probably saying, oh, those sound like communists.
Mostly from Baden-Württemberg in southwest Germany, which was an area that got 3/4 of its population wiped out in the 30 Years' War. And so they fled to America and the Volga River in Russia to escape because they were Protestants being persecuted by Catholics. And
The 30 Years' War Treaty of Westphalia. Fuck. Hang on. I used to have this one down really. It actually was exactly 30 years. 1648. I don't think. 1620. Oh dear. 30 Years' War was fucking awful for the Holy Roman Empire. By design, by the way.
And my mom was also obsessed with honor. She would say that the only thing that mattered in life was pride and class growing up, which was her WASP way of framing it. My mom's ancestry always followed the frontier. They started out in the East Coast in the colonial period and ended up in Nebraska by the mid-19th century. I know of at least 5 ancestors who died in the Indian Wars, with casualties spreading from a young girl whose family was killed in upstate New York, and then she was captured by the natives, and then she left the natives, married a white guy, then a guy who was...
Wow, she just narrowly avoided being dishonored by Rudyard there.
Killed by a black native mix in Oklahoma in a failed trade deal. A guy with the drafter, he was an ambassador to, I believe, the Chickasaw Nation. They killed him, etc. A lot of ancestors died in the Indian Wars. And
look, if you're an ambassador and you get killed, guess what? You're a bad ambassador.
And I have lots of distant relatives like Sir William Marshall, apparently William the Conqueror, Mad Anthony Wayne, or one of the drafters of the Texas Constitution.
William the Conqueror. Keep that in mind.
And the furthest ancestor I can possibly reach out, and I don't really have noble ancestors. My ancestors are all peasants, but I have some
William the Conqueror. If William the Conqueror is your ancestor, then your ancestors are not all peasants. Definitionally, William the Conqueror is the King of England. He conquered.
Bastard ancestors.
Yes, my mother's ancestors are also my ancestors, though.
Ancestors, like a bastard nobleman who was rebelling against the Jacobites and sent to South Carolina, where
a bastard nobleman is also not a peasant.
He married a native woman. I alternate between having 0.1%. Apparently, it's South Pacific Islander ancestry, according to 23andMe, but their data sets are screwed up in a way that certain genetic subcomponents of Native Americans process as Pacific Islander for them, for complex reasons, because Native Americans, they don't do genetics tests, so our data set for them is pretty small. But I am 100% Northwestern European now. There was an earlier point when my mom and my sister had 0.1% South Pacific Islander ancestry. And I'm also...
that has nothing to do with what you are or ethnic-wise. It's just how the tests are fucked. Those tests are stupid.
So... I forgot what I was going to say there. There's another relative I'm forgetting. But the established pattern in my family was that they'd move to a new frontier, form a new business, said business would do well for a generation, then the next generation would fail, the business dies, they move to a new frontier to restart. My family did this with arms manufacturing, fur trading, cotton, oil, and a variety of other industries.
How many peasants do you know are oil barons or arms dealers? None.
Each time the next generation would trash the wealth and restart on a new frontier. My grandfather grew up in one of the wealthiest families in Nebraska who ran an insurance company. He refused to take up the family business and instead decided to be a hippie as a young man. My mother is intense.
That's impressive. Your grandfather decided to be a hippie as a young man? Let's assume 1920s. His young man would be 1940s. So he managed to be a hippie a full 2 decades early, and during a war, nonetheless.
Intensely resentful about this because she grew up in poverty, and so she could have said, you know, if my father didn't drop the business, I could be a senator for Nebraska now. And there's an interesting detail here that my great-grandma was kind of a hoe, and that she was sleeping with 2 men in 1942 Nebraska. One was half Norwegian, half German, and the other was English. She married the first guy, and here I am with my 90% British Isles ancestry. Mr. Zimmer was tricked and realized he had been cucked and changed and took out his resentment on his son. That's a big reason why my grandpa left the family business.
Which is interesting because that probably happened again and again and again and again and again. And here we are, embracing the madness of Rudyard Lynch.
Because he felt he didn't deserve it because he wasn't the real son. And he left and met my grandmother at Unitarian Church because they were both rebelling against their Presbyterian parents in Lincoln, Nebraska. And they got married. My grandmother went to Swarthmore and then dropped out because she loved my grandfather to be a homemaker with him. My grandfather had a background in computer mathematics, but he lacked the personal ability to hold a job. So my mother, her brother, and my grandfather traveled around the world as he tried to hold a job. My mom partly grew up in Nebraska, Massachusetts, Iran, Maryland, North Carolina, Ontario, Alberta, amongst others. My mom grew up in poverty and constant chaos. My grandmother divorced my grandfather when my mom was around age 7, which is the age she divorced my father. And my grandmother is very...
I'm pretty sure he means the age that he was when she divorced his father. Because if she was 7 years old and divorcing his father, A, that shows a remarkable amount of efficiency for a child, and B, yikes.
Left wing. A funny story here is that when my mother told my grandmother that she was going to marry a Irish Catholic Republican, my grandmother said, who's very left wing, she said, "Oh, are you sure he'll want to have children? They're not like us, And she also thinks that we should forcibly deindustrialize. So she thinks that they shouldn't have air conditioning in Texas for climate reasons, which is deranged. That's not going to work here. So she's very left wing. And
I don't know that many left wingers who say you shouldn't. Has there been a movement where the left has argued against air conditioners at all? Like, at all? I'm What?
saw her reading a Afro-Indigenous history of America, and I joked, is there a biography for all 5 of them? And
that's racist. If you're not familiar with it's post-Columbian contact and Middle Passage triangle trade. A lot of escaped slaves would go live in Native American communities. Seminoles in Florida, a big example, because these are the only places they could live. So there's a very long tradition of these communities intermixing, primarily because they're both two oppressed communities in the colonies.
My mother was valedictorian of her high school that she finished in Worcester, Massachusetts. And then she went to Columbia University where she got a political science degree. She then worked on Wall Street where she met my father. And they started dating when my mom moved back to Boston, and then my father would commute to Boston, and then finally moved there as they dated and eventually married. My mom has a wide variety of interests and is incredibly intelligent between anthropology, religion, philosophy, chemistry, political.
This goes sideways real quick, by the way. You notice how he says, my mom's intelligent. And then let's carry on the story from there.
Science, mythology, religion, I think I said those already, etc. And she was instrumental in establishing my worldview in as profound a way as my father. My mother told me growing up that the moral values of the society would get more constrictive, so much so to a level that you would be unable to breathe in a society filled with so many social rules. And they said, Rudyard, you either have the choice of working with this system or breaking out of it and doing your own thing. And you can only really pick the second choice. My mom also ran.
Okay, if you have a choice between two things and you can only pick one of those things, you do not have a choice.
In a brewery, which was her hobby, where she would make moonshine in our garage, and she made really good beer. My mother was convinced that she was a psychic capable of communing with spirits. She would constantly tell me as a child that what the different spirits were telling her. She said she spoke to God and the devil and Mother Nature, and she'd said that the native spirits were not happy that the whites did not honor them after we conquered them, and this is why our society is so obsessed with land conquest, because in normal society you would give the spirits an offering, but we haven't given them offerings. I don't know. I just hear this stuff. And she...
Not but seconds ago, she was a very intelligent woman, and now she's a batshit crazy medium.
Believed that politeness was incredibly important, and she kept on teaching me manners and class and politeness and self-respect because she said they'd end up becoming decisive to my life. My parents met and got married living in Boston together. They had my sister Valentine.
I'm gonna move ahead as he name drops her, and that's not okay.
To be named Noelle, because Noelle's more of a bookish name. And everyone in my family, I'm going to throw this detail in because I have to throw it in somewhere to brag. Everyone in my family is over 6 foot, or at least my mom and my sister are 5'11". My dad's 6'2". I'm 6'4".
If everyone in your family is over 6 foot and 2 members of your family are not 6 foot, then I have a number of questions. And the first is, why are the women in your family somehow excluded from being part of the family? And this actually wouldn't surprise me if that's the case, given the fact that Rudyard is incredibly misogynistic. And he doesn't consider them to be family members in the same way that he considers himself and his dad to be family members. That would make sense. But otherwise, it's just illogical nonsense.
So for my sister as well, let me talk about her a little. She is a little bit younger than me. Or sorry, she's a little 2 years older than me. And she was really creative when I was a kid. She was really into fantasy novels. She wrote multiple fantasy novels as her hobby. She knits for her hobby. She's made like dozens of sweaters, and she's really into Star Trek, and she loves her dog so much. But she's a Maoist. She thinks the government should forcibly deindustrialize the economy, and
because that's what Mao Zedong was famous for, deindustrialization.
I'm going to jump ahead in my life because it doesn't fit with the narrative otherwise. She followed a lot of my mom's advice, so she moved up to Canada when I was a teenager. She went to a leftist university in Canada. She went to University of Toronto, one of the best colleges in Canada, and she left it believing that we had to forcibly deindustrialize the economy, and she believes it's immoral to have children, and she believes it's immoral to pass on her own culture, and so she's going to adopt a black baby she's going to adopt a minority rather than having one of her own babies. And she's a lesbian now. She's also really, I said she was in
right on
environmentalism earlier with that was the degree she got, and that's kind of where she became, that in high school is where she became super left-wing. As I said before, I was born in Manchester by the Sea, which is this weird beach town in northern Massachusetts up by New Hampshire. And there was a movie that was made a few years ago with Casey Affleck about that town. And my mom forced me to be born with a midwife around 4 a.m. since she believes hospitals killed the species.
She forced you to be born with a midwife. Were you involved in the birthing process? I wasn't given much choice. I just was born. Interesting choice of words again. Again, his mother has gone from being intelligent to being not that in a few minutes.
Spirit of a child through how they birthed children. And she also forced me to get no vaccine.
It's like the cameras. If you get your picture taken, your soul is stolen.
Vaccines as a kid since she believed they were dangerous to spiritual development. My mom was really against the COVID vaccine. She cut out my sister during COVID because my sister took the vaccine. I have very few memories of Massachusetts. One of them seeing a relative, my uncle. The other one is there was a huge snowstorm and I was a toddler. I was 3. I couldn't walk through the snowstorm. And I remember just seeing snow everywhere. I'd make little prints in the snow with my boots. And we were the only outsiders in that town that had moved in for decades. And thus the zoning board was able to kick us out of the town. The entire town was old money Yankees whose families had been there for centuries. And we were the first nouveau riche to move there. They were not financially in a good place because they were living off really old money. And there was a degree of resentment. And they made up rumors my dad was making his money off drug trafficking, and my mom was a horse and dog lady, and they made it basically illegal to have both animals in town. We were completely socially outcasted and forced to leave. The company my dad worked at had dual offices in Boston and Philly. When I was 4, my dad made the decision to move our family to Philadelphia. He made this call since he was from across the river to Pennsylvania in New Jersey, so he knew the culture there. I often think about this for a couple reasons. Firstly, with the zoning board in Massachusetts, you would hope something that petty and tribal wouldn't happen today in an advanced first world, one of the most advanced states in a first world country, but it does. Secondarily, it's interesting that it became such a pivotal part of my life. Being a Pennsylvanian.
Does that thing happen today? Sure, but not really with white people.
Is such a big part of my identity that wouldn't be there if I grew up in northern Massachusetts. And finally, it's really interesting anthropologically because both my dad and my mom, Nebraska and New Jersey, are part of the Midland cultural group anthropologists talk about. And so when they were up in the Yankee population group, the town forced them out and they defaulted back onto moving to a region where they were culturally and genetically closer to the population. It's another example of anthropology in action. And my parents, I think, are pretty objectively part of America's ruling class, but they kind of degenerated into rednecks and refused to take it. We always lived at least 20 to 30 minutes from the nearest grocery store, nearly 40 minutes from shopping, and an hour from the city. I always lived next to cows, cornfields, and woods. I remember seeing a drought one year which broke all the land and crackled it up. And interestingly, that drought is part of the cause for the Arab Spring because grain prices went up as the Midwest got drier. And then that very winter, there was an 11-foot snowdrift where there was snow dunes up to 11 feet tall. And my mom would literally make moonshine in the garage. In a job interview for my mom's brewery, a guy literally skinned a deer during the job interview in front of us. My dad and I would go duck hunting together. I didn't really associate with other wealthy people, with my entire network being middle-class people from the schools I went to, and my parents don't really have connections. I always hoped that
this is the being rich part, or being part of the ruling class, but cope that he does is ridiculous.
Being a banker's son from rural PA would get me further, but on the national scale, it doesn't matter at all. It's completely irrelevant. And my parents lived by themselves in the woods. And growing up, the thing I thought about the most was the forest. It's just trees everywhere in every direction. And that always got to me. And I'd spend hours playing in the forest, and I was shocked that it went on forever. And it was so beautiful with all the animals and the grass and the creeks and stuff. That area of the country is super beautiful. It looks a lot like the Shire and this English rural ideal, but it's more wooded. And I just thought the world was an empty place growing up because we didn't even
It's more wooded, so it looks nothing at all like the Shire.
go to Philly that much. And so I just remember seeing
The Shire, a place well known for its woods, so much so that they have a tree that's so big it's called the party tree, and people know what it is.
infinite trees. Both of my parents nearly died before I turned 6. My dad was from mercury poisoning. We spoke about that before. And my mom was kicked in the head by a horse. And I just assumed my mom was dead for the next 2 days. And she was brain dead. And I still remember the air siren going off as the ambulance came to get my mom. My sister, Valentine, and I were hiding under the kitchen aisle when the policeman said, "Hey, kids." And my sister and I would joke about that for years. That's such a short thing to say to kids who just thought their mom died. My mom, after she nearly died, said that she had visited God. She said that God had forced her to come back to help people. This resulted in her immediately divorcing my father. My mom wanted us to all sleep in the same bed as a family, and my dad refused. I ran out of the bed, and then my dad spanked me.
Okay. When did your father refuse? This is weird, by the way. Your father refused to have everyone sleep in the same bed. But then you ran out of the bed from which your father had refused to have you all sleep in, and then he spanked you because you ran out of the bed that he refused to have you all sleep in. I'm not sure the horse just got your mom.
My mom then took my sister and me out of school and took me away from my dad's custody. My parents put me in this French language school in Philadelphia for stupid reasons I still don't understand. My dad was terrified of my mom divorcing him, and so he was leading her on that we could move to France as a family, which was never actually an option. And so I was held hostage in this French language situation. And I was very resentful because I was forced to learn classes in a language I did not know, that no one explained to me. So I had to learn French on the fly. And I was so resentful because the commute was 1 hour each way. We were going from rural Pennsylvania to Philly for my school commute. So when I was 5 and 6, I was commuting 2 hours a day. And I would count every single day until I was out of school, and I had a tick because I saw school as slavery. And I watched the Ben-Hur scene as a child, and I empathized with the galley slaves, where I felt like I was like them.
Yes, you were rowing in a galley all day long, and not in what I would assume would be an incredibly expensive school.
After my mom took my sister, she took my sister and me. She claimed that my dad was an alcoholic who was beating her and my sister and me. There's literally no evidence for this at all. And my father physically couldn't even drink at the time due to him having gout. And the worst he ever did was...
Yes, gout does limit your ability to drink. It does not mean that people don't do it anyway.
He spanked me twice. However, my mom is a literal schizophrenic that has different internal monologues which conflict with the other. She had no evidence.
It was 10 minutes ago that she was a very smart lady. Now she's schizophrenic who's incapable of viewing reality
At all for the claim and is mentally ill. She passed the Chester County test for not being mentally ill. And if my mom doesn't score mentally ill on a test, your test's broken. And on top of that, my mom really spiraled with getting kicked in the head by a horse. She had issues beforehand, and then it became magnified. And
look, fair, okay? Fair. Like, oh, it turns out getting kicked in the head by a horse is a significant emotional event. Yes, and a physical one, and a mental one. I'm going to hand her that one.
And her entire life since that has been a downward spiral towards greater and greater madness as she loses touch with the world. And
well, it's nice to see you're following in your maternal footsteps.
My mom played the courts incredibly intelligently. It was basically an incentive structure thing where with the
which is really interesting and difficult to do if you're insane.
Criticism, they were incentivized to accept the criticism because if there was any chance my dad was beating my mom and me, their career was over. So they sided with my mom out of their own basal self-interest. And the court gave my mom full custody of me and my sister for years, and my dad was only able to see us a few hours in guided visitation. And my mom took 2/3 of my dad's money. I would like to restate, my father did literally nothing wrong here by all accounts. He's an admirable man as a citizen and as an adult.
Your father refused to buy you shoes. Maybe reevaluate that situation. I'm sure there were other things.
I sided with my dad against my mom, and my sister sided with my mom, but it didn't.
That's clear.
Matter. The court system sided with my mom. My mom said that God had told her the best way she could help human history was by torturing me. She said she did this since she loved me, and God told her that the more she tortured me, the more vastly disproportionate the impact on human history would be in a positive way. My mom abused me in ways I can't even put into words. She tortured me, said that God had told her the best way she could help human history was by torturing me. She said she did this since she loved me, and God told her that the more she tortured me, the more vastly disproportionate the impact on human history would be in a positive way.
Or she tortured me. Torture? The greater the torture, the less the impact. So God told your mother to torture you to make sure that you have less of an impact on human history. Was your mother under the impression that God told you that you were going to be little incel Hitler? Because if she was, then that's one for God. I told you there was going to be abuse. I was upfront about that.
Positive way. My mom abused me in ways I can't even put into words. I left my childhood feeling completely numb and just dead. My mom believed she would have an enormous breakthrough in the field of agriculture, in which modern agriculture was destroying the innate living biosphere. And she believed that by torturing me, she brought this fate closer. My mom started out as a sort of socialist and communist who believed that there was going to be a revolution against the rich. And then she went through a Wicca phase, a Christian fundamentalist phase, and by the time I graduated high school, she was a far-right borderline fascist. She wanted America to be a WASP ethno-state where she believed the Jews, the banks, and the Catholics were destroying America. My life was a complete nightmare. My mom moved me and my sister 13 times before I turned age 15. And I was never able to get any stability. I started to see my life as trench warfare. Whenever I had a free moment, I would dig myself in for the next barrage. My family had money, but my mom was so financially irresponsible that she would constantly sue my father for more money before spending it on stupid stuff. My mom, my sister, and I lived in a one-room log cabin for 6 months while my mom tried to get more money. My mom would make moonshine and ran a brewery as her job in the garage. My father did something quite heroic here.
Where with the one-room log cabin?
He realized that my mom was crazy, and he spent 6 years fighting my mom in court for custody of me. He realized that if he didn't do this, his children would just be lost forever. The sanity, safety, and stability my father provided me is the thing that kept me alive. I would 100% have killed myself if he wasn't there. And he was finally able to get 1/3 custody of me and my sister. The Chester County court system gave the nickname that the Lynch family were the people who would never surrender an inch on anything. My parents literally threatened to sue each other over half-an-hour time frames of custody in single days of determining who's...
That's what you call really bad custody hearings.
But custody I got would become hostage negotiations for me. My parents viewed every concession they would give the other as an insult to their own honor that they had to fight to the death over. I learned to shut up since the
because honor culture is stupid.
Courts clearly didn't care about anything I was saying, and I knew what game they were playing, in that I knew they were trying to get evidence to support my mom because it was the easier choice. And I dealt with like about half a dozen different social workers in order to assess custody, and none of them knew what was happening. And for multiple of the social workers, I just realized the game and I refused to speak. There was a guy called D'Amico who was a social worker who I declared war on him, and I just stared at the clock for the entire hour session because he was trying to pull concessions out of me to make a story that my dad was the bad guy. At least that's what I remember. I once told the judge, "Are you deaf?" Since past a certain point, I knew nothing I said mattered. I was...
Yeah, I don't even think a judge would react well to that if you were a child. Maybe if you were a child and you were in a family court situation, but a teenager, you might find yourself in some trouble there. I don't know how, like, I believe fully that his parents had vicious custody battles over them, particularly because that probably affected who had to pay what, when. I don't necessarily... Let's assume for a moment that Rudyard is saying a grain of truth and that his mother decided to quote-unquote torture him. I'm not entirely... Like family court takes pains to assess these situations. If Rudyard had turned around and said something, which, like, it sounds like he thinks he did, then they would have sent a social worker to evaluate that. Even if it's not an effective system, if you have this level of what's going on, there's going to be police reports and child protective services involved, and all of these things both ways. Like, they wouldn't just leave it at that. So, like, this doesn't sound like it's a fully remembered thing.
An insanely aggressive kid. I literally would play strategy games for 4 hours a day. They became my entire life, and I'd play games like Age of Mythology, Age of Empires, Civilization, Total War, or Battle for Middle-earth, just to name a few. Stronghold Legends is great too. And my mom had a rule that I could only play video games for 1 hour a day, but I broke that because my
Torture, 1 hour a day.
commute was 2 hours, so I played video games in those 2 hours. And my dad would subsidize and buy video games for me and let me play them as much as possible. And I think,
which, by the way, is a really common divorced parent tactic to undercut the other. Guess what? I'm not against limiting kids' screen time either.
playing that many video games when I was in a traumatic experience was so good for me in that it wired my brain in a lot of useful ways we'll see later in this video. And
good point, Paul Dead. Video games, no shoes. Shoes are communist.
I remember a moment when a teacher said, if as a class, we spent 1 hour a week doing math practice in 3rd grade, we could get an ice cream party at the end of the year. I told her no, since that doesn't add up, because hundreds of hours of, or dozens of hours of effort does not equal an ice cream lunch. It's just not a correct calculation. And she kept bullying me to do this until she gave up and let me go to the ice cream party anyway. And every single day I was in that French language school, I would count the hours until the day end.
Dozens of hours of effort don't equal an ice cream party, but they quite literally do. You are told if you do X, you will get Y. So then X, whatever combination of things make up X, is equal to Y. You were just being an asshole about ice cream.
I told my parents multiple times a week how much I hated that school, and they only took me out after 4 years to put me in public school, finally. I had to interject this point in later, but a story I want to remember is when I was in 5th grade, or around age 10, my friends and I played a board game at the end of the school year, that being Axis and Allies, and I remembered the exact placement for troops years later for each faction. 5 years later, I remembered what territory each faction held and how strategically. And that started to weird me out that I had very good memory. And my dad would play a game where he would play a song twice for me and then have me repeat back the lyrics. And he was astonished that I could do it. I actually really enjoyed going to public school. This was in a rural area around Hawkinson, or on the Mason-Dixon line where Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Maryland meet up. And my mom moved there from the area around Malvern, and my dad continued to live further north of there. And it's one of those beautiful places I've ever seen in the world, where, as I said before, it looks like the Shire. It's just rolling fields and countryside. And Winslow Homer was a famous painter who used Chadds Ford, where I grew up, as the set for his landscape paintings. Everyone was really nice to me, and I made a lot of friends. I even got along with the teachers, which I thought was impossible because I was so combative. When I was in 4th grade, one of the teachers saw a map I made, and she said, "Rudyard, you're going to be famous when you grow up." And the culture of the area I grew up in, Chester...
Whoopsie! He was not terribly wrong.
County at the time was called God, Guns, and Horses. And over time, it became more left-wing, and it got...
Bosch would be right at home.
Pacified. And the way to see the North...
It got pacified. The fucking communists pacified the gods and guns.
Northeast is that in Pennsylvania...
They still got horses, though.
Is you got a series of different subcultures. So the way the greater Philly area goes is you have Midwestern Protestants, Catholic Northeasterners, and Black Southerners. And where I grew up felt like a cultural extension of the Midwest. It felt like it could be completely Ohio, where when I was in middle school, I'm
very sorry for you.
Our curriculum in history is at how the American Revolution was amazing. Then all our history teachers were members of the NRA and they owned guns. Our Boy Scouts leaders were former Vietnam vets. It's very much that kind of culture. You know, in a lot of Pennsylvania, in rural Pennsylvania, they give the first day of the deer hunting season as a day off from school and from work. Hunting's a big part of the culture there. And to change topic to something less pleasant, my mom started to spiral into bizarre conspiracy theories that my father had bands of thugs who were vandalizing her property. And She literally had no evidence for this. And the Chester County court system got so fed up with her bullshit that they literally refused to take cases from my family, forcing them to go to external counseling to solve our own issues. Chester County Psycho.
That's where. How big is Chester County? Like, are we jumping around again? Delaware Valley region, southwest eastern part of the state. Big.
Goes through judges, and my mom accused each of the different judges and any social worker who stood against her of corruption charges. And the third judge built up a personal vendetta against my mom and demanded that every future case that involved her go through her. This judge saved me so much suffering, and I literally emailed her to thank her as an adult. My mom shot one of her horses to frame my father for killing it. My mom would also keep 5 cats from one of her friends in a tiny closet that barely had air. This is a weird tangent, but my mom was also obsessed with the FBI stalking her. I have suspicions my mom was involved in the secret government testing program MKUltra, given they sourced from places like Columbia Political Science Department at that very moment, as far as I've researched. My mom was super cynical.
What?
About the ruling class before that was a big thing. She believed she was a psychic, which is another MKUltra thing. She was paranoid about the FBI following her, and I also know that she was molested. That's too many points for my own comfort, and I'm scared to even say stuff like this on this video, but this video is going to get so much crazy. That's not even in the top 10.
Oh, he's absolutely right about that.
My mom hired security guards against this imaginary threat, but then those bankrupted her, so she moved my sister and me against my father's consent to downtown Philly. This really disappointed me since I loved living in Chester County so much. I went to a Quaker school in Philly, and I was raised a Quaker because my mom has lots of Quaker ancestors, and my dad thought I should be raised Protestant. And Quakers are really big in that region of Pennsylvania because they founded it. And I attended 2 Quaker services a week for years straight. I've attended Quaker services for most of my life. And people have said to me that Quakerism has had an enormous impact on how I see the world. And that makes sense to me. My mom was a horse lady, and she also taught me how to ride. I was a pretty good horseman as a kid, and my mom said it's important because horseback riding teaches you leadership, because most leadership is implicit through body language and how you carry yourself, which is how horses communicate. And she said, quote, "Deal with a horse as you would deal with a woman or a crowd. They are emotional prey animals."
Yikes. Okay. That is quite enough to be getting on with for tonight. Also, it's been 2.5 hours. We are about an hour into this. We have 9 hours to go. My plan is to do 1 hour a night. This is heavy stuff. Get up, go hang out with normal people. Forget about this until we begin the next stream.